Welcome to the I Am Capable podcast. I'm your host, Alex Gilbert, CEO, founder, and coach of Capable Consulting. I was diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD at the age of 8, and since then, I've navigated school, work, and leadership through a lens of neurodiversity, allowing me to create a set of strategies and insights to help neurodiverse professionals thrive. Tune in each episode for real-life scenarios, tools that bridge the gap between employees and employers. If you're a company leader, fostering inclusion, or a neurodiverse professional seeking support, then you are in the right place. Through this podcast, we'll grow together and explore what it means to have work be challenging and not hard. Let's break down the stigmas, boost productivity, and celebrate the strengths that help you feel empowered to say, I am capable. Welcome back to the I Am Capable podcast. I'm your host, Alex Gilbert, CEO, founder, and coach of Capable Consulting. And this is the last episode of the season, and so we're going to change things up a bit. I'm not going to be the one being interviewed. I'm actually going to interview a former corporate client so that we can talk about neurodiversity in a whole different light. Someone who understands neurodiversity from the perspective of being someone who's neurodiverse, working in a corporation that specializes in building communities and help job seekers, and also worked in the DEI space and HR. I mean, doesn't that sound like a great person to bring on for the last episode? This is my friend Jordan. We've worked together in the past, and I know that you are really going to enjoy this conversation as we talk about all of the things to bring in this whole season of understanding neurodiversity in the workplace and how you can show up and remind yourself that you are capable. So let me introduce Jordan Lux here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Hi, thank you for having me.
So Jordan, as I said, I'm kind of changing this up. Normally, my assistants are asking me questions and holding me accountable, and now I get to ask you so many questions and kind of take the back seat. And I'm very excited to do this because I know you have so much to say, and you and I could talk for hours and hours on end, but we're not going to do that today. We'll talk for maybe an hour to talk about neurodiversity. So before we kind of jump into all the things, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, as I kind of just gave a little bit of information, but it's better to hear from you.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I was working with you at Glassdoor, and I was using your program to help build the neurodiversity inclusion in our workspace. And the amount of progress we made was incredible. But as we pointed out, as we started discussing, there's so much more to do. And there's so many people that don't even know in the workplace kind of like what neurodiversity is.
Absolutely. And, you know, you're showing up to this in a completely different lens. As somebody being neurodiverse, you're recognizing a lot of the tools that we talked about as things that are challenges that might not have shown up. So how did you really show up differently because you're neurodiverse and coming into this ERG, spearheading this program to help bring awareness to other people that you are working with?
I actually just realized this the other day. So I've been in the disability advocacy realm my entire life because my dad was in a wheelchair. So I grew up around people that were disabled, overcoming their challenges. And so when I realized I was neurodiverse later in life, I didn't have that barrier of a disability is a negative thing. So I was able to show up in that space a different way that was just empowering and could bring that to light for other people who were also on that journey and make them feel like that the disability stigma wasn't a bad thing.
You know, it's so interesting as you're saying that, and you and I have talked about this before, but even as you're saying this, that your dad was in a wheelchair, we've talked about disabilities and having neurodiversity show up in different ways and how people don't necessarily see that you're disabled or see that you are neurodiverse. And therefore, you mentioned to me, you felt like you weren't disabled enough to actually ask any questions or find accommodations because people didn't understand it. So can you tell me a little bit more about what made you feel that way?
Absolutely. I think the ability to mask is the biggest thing where you can get by in society and you're just painted the picture of weird or different and don't really understand that the things that are happening to you are disabling compared to how other people are living their lives. So little things like time blindness or object permanence might just be a little hindrance in your perspective. But when compared to somebody else living their life, they don't have to deal with do I get to put on makeup this morning, or do I get to eat a full breakfast before I'm completely out of energy and have to go into work?
Yeah, I think that we've talked about so many of the challenges that you just mentioned. We've talked about, even in the last episode, we were talking about how time blindness shows up. It feels really hard to share this kind of information and not feel supported in that. So I'm wondering if you're struggling with any of those types of challenges at work, what were some of the accommodations you might have asked for?
Some of the big ones that our workplace had already set up were the flexible time and hours, which, if I didn't have a meeting scheduled, it was kind of you show up as a professional and get your work done in whatever time you need in the day, and not necessarily you clock in at 9, you clock out at 5. You're not tied to a desk. And that, I think, was the biggest thing that helped, just being able to not have to make my brain work when it didn't want to work.
Yeah, I think I struggle with that myself. And this is so timely, especially because this was so much of what we talked about in the last episode of like showing up as the best version of yourself. The idea is you want to be productive. You want to show up as your best self. You want to be supported in that. And a lot of times there is so much ableism that comes into these conversations when you are having talks with a boss or a manager or even within your company. So, you were seeking out capable consulting and trying to bring in so much of what we do into the workplace. I'm wondering, even in filtering this conversation, what did that look like for you to talk about bringing workshops around neurodiversity within this ERG, but also within your company to change that conversation that you mentioned was so impactful?
I think the biggest thing, and scrolling back a little bit, I am a very transparent person. I'm a very open person. And a lot of people connected and resonated with my story. And in a town hall, I actually said I didn't feel disabled enough. And that hit home with so many people. But then when it came to introducing more concepts of neurodiversity and either people accepting it for themselves or exploring what it could mean if they didn't already have a diagnosis, the opposite end was people were willing to want to be inclusive, but didn't necessarily know how to take all the steps that it would take to get to full inclusion and set people up for success.
Yeah, I mean, that is so much of what I try and do in these workshops is kind of bridging the gap between the two and also giving you the communication tools to be able to have those conversations, to kind of break the ice on something that feels so hard for people to do and really something that we're trying to change within the system, as opposed to having the person who's got the disability to constantly advocate for themselves all of the time, because that can be really exhausting. You and I have talked about what you would do as you were, moving into a new position and what you would look for. And I think it's just so interesting how we can approach this differently with the lens of the environment is just as important as the actual job title itself. And the people that you are surrounded with are what is going to give you the chance to not only set yourself up for success, but really show up as your best self. So talking about kind of being that translator as we were working on this program, you're talking about communication styles and kind of educating people and sharing your story, and you felt very comfortable doing so. But I'm wondering, what were some of the gaps that were missing as you were starting to have these conversations more openly?
I think the biggest gap is the understanding of how much you have to learn about neurodiversity if you don't know. And that's the challenging part, is you don't know what you don't know. And so you think you might be being inclusive, but you're still missing a huge component of it. And if it's not your hyper focus or something that is internally affecting you, that deficit of information of how neurodiversity works can really be holding you back as a leader to set your team up for success.
I mean, I totally agree, but it's also, a lot of the times we've talked about the fact that you're talking two different languages. You have the same goal as they do. And every time you were trying to make an impact and make a change, it was like, what is happening? Why don't they understand? Why is this so frustrating to come across. We all have this same goal. So can you kind of walk me through some of those conversations and maybe why they were more frustrating to have? Because, again, you have the same goal.
I think the easiest way to describe it is a metaphor. I love metaphors,
Me
and
too.
that's part of the communication that you need to work together. But it's like a dance, and both parties need to understand the moves and steps of the dance. So if one person is executing the dance perfectly, but the other person is still misstepping, regardless of who's on either side, then you still have that piece of frustration.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to kind of even hear an example of what that might have looked like for you on a day-to-day, because I think that this is something that happens so often, and we're talking about it in a metaphor, and we're talking about it as translating, but is there a specific conversation that comes to mind? Because I'm sure you're like, oh, that one. That was the thing that threw me over the edge. Oh,
There
I see it. I see it
are a
coming.
couple. Yeah, that you spurred a memory there.
There you go.
I remember, and this was me so I was in marketing, and then I also was the leader of the ERG. So one was my real job and one was my volunteer job, essentially, within the company. And in my marketing job, as someone who was a heavy advocate and understood the communication styles and ability to, talk to my direct manager about these things, at my last performance review, I had to go back and forth with them about all of the challenges that I was having and what I was seeing. And I got a negative performance review after I switched teams. My manager was let go and they gave me a completely different job role. And within the 3 months of all of that happening, on top of me getting married, that was the window of opportunity to assess my performance. And so when they came back and said, "Oh, your performance was low," as someone who's been a chronic overperformer her entire career, it was shocking. It was jarring. It was like, what is going on? Because I am always someone who goes above and beyond and tries to do the best of her abilities. And then in a situation where I'm not set up for success with all of these changes happening, and I'm trying to advocate for myself and going back and forth with my manager asking for clarification, and the expectation was for me to figure it out.
Oh my God, you just reminded me, my first boss out of college, that was his key line to me every single time was figure it out. And I swear that was like something that was drilled in my brain of like, doesn't matter what it is, you figure it out. You ask for help, doesn't matter, you figure it out. Like, I apologize later, which often I had to apologize later. There are so many stories of which I should very much have been fired for how many times I should have apologized. But I was like, listen, I'm new to this. Your expectations are something, but they weren't actually, it doesn't sound like they were actually shared with you. So as you're pushing for this and trying to advocate for yourself, what are some things that the company itself could have done to prepare you for all of these different transitions? Because I think this is something that's really common right now, especially with the way the job markets are. There's so many layoffs that are happening. There's so many changes that are happening within companies and structures and mergers. Job titles are changing. People are changing. Expectations are changing. So I'm curious, what are some steps that could have been taken to actually set you up for success, understanding your new job role and what you might have needed to really do it well?
I think the biggest thing is bringing me into the conversation to understand the context of what they needed me to do. And within my role, I had expertise that they were relying on that they didn't talk to me about when they were developing these new things that I was doing. So the things that I enjoyed about my job, I didn't get to say, here's what I like doing, here's what I'm good at. It was kind of this gray area of, we don't know what you're going to be doing, but we need you to stay active doing things while we're trying to figure it out. And that was the biggest piece of, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing.
So not only were the actual role expectations not within the scope, it wasn't what you were hired to do. So now you're overcompensating for a job that doesn't necessarily make sense to you. The role and structure of it wasn't really clear. There was probably not very much training involved in what you were going to be doing. So you're now forced to do something that doesn't make sense to you without any conversation that's happening. And the expectation is that you were the failure. I think that is so frustrating. It kind of reminds me, this is like one of the first times I actually advocated for myself. I think I was in like 8th grade, and I had this science teacher who I did not understand this at all. Anything that had to do with numbers and measuring things, like, forget it. And she had her class, and I didn't understand things. I asked her multiple times to stay for extra help. She didn't show up. I was going over it with my resource room teachers. They didn't really understand what her expectation was because she didn't share with them either. And I quote unquote failed the test. And she handed it back to me and said, "I'm really disappointed in you." And I took the paper and I shoved it back at her and I said, "No, I'm disappointed in you. I asked you questions. I showed up for extra help. You didn't show up. So what am I learning here? You failed me. I didn't fail." And she was so mortified. This was like one of her last year's teaching. Also, should have kept this line to myself, but I didn't. I had to just dig in the dagger. I said, "I'm really glad you're retiring because no one will have to listen to you." So, of course, she called my parents after that and was like, that was something for a 14-year-old to say to me. And my mom was like, "I've never been so proud of my life. But like, you're right. You didn't show up. She kept asking you." But honestly, it's the same thing. That kind of problem never really evolves. That constant expectation of we should automatically know what to do without any realization. And the thing is, as I said, this is happening in companies all over the country right now with all of these murders and layoffs and things happening. All of these job expectations are changing. Everybody needs to know what their job is and what the expectation is. And I think it's unfair to say that the failure is you when the failure is the system that they've kind of put you in and told you to run with it. So I feel like there's so much that HR really needs to think about as they are reshuffling, because not only is that frustrating for you on the other end as the employee, but what does the morale look like around you when everyone else probably feels similarly to you in terms of, what am I doing here? I don't know. And yet I'm going to be told this is my role or these are the expectations. So I'm curious if there are specific steps that you think HR could have done to really set you up differently, and maybe not necessarily given you a bad review, but at least laid out the expectations of what they wanted you to do before they sat you down.
I think the biggest thing that would have been a help for me is what I kept asking for is, and what we were kind of in limbo with, is writing down what I was supposed to be doing, what teams I was supporting, and what time I was supposed to be allocating to specific teams. And even within that, there was some confusion and miscommunication between what I was allowed to say yes to, what I was allowed to say no to, and what was on my plate. And the biggest thing that I remember was I was asking for clarification, and I could feel my manager getting annoyed that I was asking for more. Like, I need more context. I need more detail. Am I doing this correctly? Can you give me some validation that I'm on the right path? And I could just feel that kind of like, why are they asking again? What about this doesn't make sense? And that makes you as an employee not want to ask more questions.
Oh my God. That resonates so much with me, but so many of my clients that they're just constantly frustrating. A lot of the times when I talk to people, they just give me these work scenarios where they're like, "I just want to fix it. Just let me fix it." And then they have conversations and they ask clarifying questions, and their manager above them is like, "Nope. There's so many other rules in place that we can't go around in order to do that." But you kind of get to be in both perspectives because you understand how a lot of these policies take place, how these roles are kind of set in place. And I'm curious if that was the constant feeling you were having with your boss and feeling just less excited to kind of ask clarifying questions. Wow, my words. Clarifying questions in order to really get what you needed. Is there training that you could have implemented from an HR perspective as they were making all of these shifts that would have maybe set your manager up to show up as their best self too?
That was actually what we were working on right before I was unfortunately let go. But we had implementing the capable consulting training program to create a training program internally to help broaden the standard for how we're having conversations with people and kind of have an advocacy group within the company for people that were struggling to help have better conversations and kind of mediate between their manager and bridge the gap of what the deficit was.
I love that. I mean, just a little shout out of some of the workshops that I'm working on and why we're doing that, because there's so much talent that you're also missing in that. You know, you were sitting down and talking about the fact that your role had shifted, but you weren't actually working on any of the things that are really fitting your scope of work that made more sense for you to do, the reason you were actually hired in the first place. So I'm curious, how can we really tap into some of that talent that maybe you picked up from learning from the workshops itself to help people figure out what are we missing here?
I think the big thing is a mindset shift within leaders to understand that your employees want to do good. We want to excel. We want to be proud of our work. But if we're not getting the either validation or confirmation that we're on the right track, then it's just going to feel like we're in survival mode, showing up to work, just trying to get through for a paycheck. And that's not what anybody wants to feel like.
Yeah, I totally understand. And I think that that's something we're trying to get to the other side of. We're trying to remind employees and employers our goals are the same. That is where the bridging of the gap is really happening, and trying to build that communication style that is going to be helpful for everyone so that they can show up and feel supported and validated and can be successful in a way that is supportive of how they think and learn. And everyone is coming to the table hired to do roles that they're good at. That's why you're hiring them. And you're very unique in this situation of not only are you now in the job seeking environment, but you're also coming from Glassdoor that is openly putting out information of like, what is the environment like? You know, I use Glassdoor for all of my clients to kind of gauge the right environment. And I think the environment is even more important than the job itself. And I've said this as much as I possibly can because I want you to be able to show up as your authentic self. And so you're, as I said, you're in this unique space, but what is it that, what's one policy that if it had been implemented would have been just bare minimum, a place to start to really shift that narrative, shift that focus of what success looks like for everybody?
I think one thing that could have a huge impact is the different ways information is presented. So if it's something said in a town hall, also make it in a written document or something tangible outside of just saying it one way. So if it's verbal, also make it written. If it's written, also make it verbal. And then saying it more than once or in different ways so that if it was missed and it's super important, it's not just interpreted in a stagnant way.
The other thing I'm thinking about is just conversations you and I have had. And I'm obviously talking in such a bubble of people who agree with me in terms of what inclusivity looks like. But I'm also talking to a ton of creatives. You are so creative. And you have said things to me over the time that I've known you that I was like, Jordan, what? Like, that's brilliant. And I want to shed light on one of those things because I do not want to miss this. We talked about like how sometimes we were in meetings that were very long and very drawn out. And you were like, why isn't this a game? Why didn't you put this into AI and make it a trivia game that we were all participating in? And it was like Jeopardy. And I was like, what? Gamify this? I'm curious if you had to like change a new work setting as you're thinking about where you want to go, what would be like a fun way to actually keep your attention, get your creative juices going and kind of give you a place to be your authentic self to talk to your colleagues?
I have always been that person at work that just branded the culture, whether it be in person and setting people's offices up as like, fill them with balloons for their birthday, or print paper money with people's face on it and throw it all over their desk. And bringing that into a remote world, having that same kind of energy around making things fun and making people feel valued, making things into a comic book that you want to share. So AI is a great tool for this because it can take all of the information that you are going to present for your meeting and turn it into a murder mystery party and engage the people that you're trying to teach something new to and trigger a different response than just, okay, sit and listen to this. Try not to disassociate while I'm talking at you for 30 minutes.
Murder mystery? Are you kidding? I mean, like, this is like why I talk to so many people about the workshops that I actually do for companies and why they're so different. Because I work with people who are neurodivergent, who can't sit, who want to engage, who want to be entertained. But also, if you think about it, that's what's triggering their memory too. That's what's sitting in their core of like, now I understand this in a totally different way. Like every workshop I've talked about, I start talking about your favorite games or your least favorite game. I'm doing breakout groups. I am constantly engaging people in different ways. And basically what you're saying is like, yeah, we're remote. I'm staring at my computer all day long. Engage me. Like do something that's going to make me want to listen and not zone out and answer my emails on the side. And you're right, AI is a great tool. The comic book thing is hilarious. I mean, there's several clients, if you can imagine, that would be like totally into any material that I send them that I would put into a comic book. And now I probably will do that because then they'll actually read things that I send them. I struggle with that too. So I think that that's a great way to do that. I'm curious, you're coming at this from so many different lines of thinking, which is why I specifically brought you in. Someone who's neurodiverse, someone who's worked in ERG around neurodiversity, someone who's worked in HR, someone who's worked in media. And I think a lot of my clients are in the media space. There's just so much creativity in that. You're now talking from a company who specializes in helping job seekers and also really understanding communities within their job companies and what their environment is going to look like. So help me bridge the gap. Best place to work, best case scenario. What do you think that that's going to look like if you had to reimagine it?
If I had my wish list of perfect company, it would be remote work. That's a big one. Or if I did have to go into the office, have some sort of flexible, like, whenever you can come into the office, that's when you come into the office, and core working hours amongst different time zones. I think that was a huge one, so that we were structured enough that we could get things done together, but flexible enough that I didn't have to worry about when my energy dips were affecting my workload.
There's so much of what you've said that I've shared in terms of timing, that it's not just somebody who's neurodiverse who needs that flexibility. Everybody needs that flexibility. And we realize how productive we can all be when we're not forced to sit at that time. And I think that that really plays to the strengths of everybody to be able to hold them responsible enough to say, yeah, we all need to show up at certain times so that we can have meetings and things like that. But like your time and how you show up is really important. I think that there's also a number of factors in setting people up, even as you're saying remotely, of the training that's involved and what the expectations are so that everyone's on the same page. You've mentioned a few different times of having, some written work, but also having it shared verbally, how you can engage people and have it be creative, especially if you're remote, having that camaraderie regardless of where you are. There are a lot of different unique places to set you up. And I'm curious, how do you know to look for it? What are you looking for on companies' websites that really share with you that they're going to be open to different lines of thinking?
This is a great question because I'm currently in the mix of trying to find a new job. But something you said to me the other day, I was in that survival mode of like, I'll do anything. I can work in any workplace. I have the skills. I can work in a difficult workplace. I can work in a, fully inclusive dream job workplace. And it really pulled my focus into realizing I need to be looking deeper into not only the job description, making sure that the keywords of they're not saying things like, oh, this job is a family, or, you can work in a high, fast paced environment. What I'm looking for with companies now is three main things. As I'm looking through the job description, I'm making sure that the keywords that I want to see are there. Then I'm looking at their Glassdoor reviews, making sure that I'm looking for work-life balance conversations, looking at the disability tab, seeing if that number is significantly lower than the regular score, and then looking at what those individuals have to say about what working there is like. And then honestly, the biggest giveaway is, do they have an accommodation request easily accessible within the job posting? Because that right there will tell you if a company is practicing what they preach or if it's just kind of a, oh, we have to be inclusive. So, like, here's the thing.
I am so glad you brought that up because I actually don't think that I've brought that up specifically in any of the episodes. And it's something that I often talk to people about. Like, one of my clients works for Chase, and they have a whole neurodiversity at work program that has all types of mentors and a facilitation. And she requested very easily to have her interview done differently. She's thriving in that job. She's been there for a couple of years now. And that was something that we were looking for and so many of my clients look for, but I haven't actually brought it up. And I think that that's really, really unique to having a disability and what it's like looking for a job when you have a disability that people don't really think about. And you kind of have to ask different questions. You have to know yourself well enough to know, is this the right environment for me to thrive? And what is it going to be like for me to advocate? And the conversation that you and I were having of like, yeah, I could work anywhere, I could do anything. I'm like, you could. Do you want to? Do you want to show up and have to work so hard to do a job that's the expectation? Because it never gets easier. You're just constantly holding the bar higher of what you have to advocate for. And I think that HR, if you're going to listen in on this conversation, some of the takeaways that I'm thinking about, not just for myself and what I've shared on the show, but really what Jordan is also saying is like, how are you showing up and not just putting words on a paper, but really showing up in a way that is inclusive, that you're representing a whole different population of people that you work with in different learning styles, that the expectations on your job descriptions are similar, that your trainings have an opportunity to be done remotely, in person, that have written, have verbal, have a lot of different lines of communication and trainings for managers and so on, so that we know how to share our expectations with our employees. I think there's a lot that we can do that we could always do better. And one of my corporate clients had said to me, like, well, we're always moving the goalposts. I'm like, yeah, we are. Everything that we're doing, we're constantly changing the goal, because once you reach it, you're on to the next goal. And there's some really key things that you've mentioned that feel like a very low bar of where we can start. And as you're kind of entering in this transitional phase, I'm curious if there is one thing that you would say, like, start here. Because I've shared a lot of what I think are like start here moments, but I'm curious from your perspective, what's the start here moment?
For companies, I think the biggest thing is how we can realize we're leading our workforce into burnout. And that can be as little as allowing people to be off camera more. Allowing them to not be perceived when they're also trying to do work. That's a huge one that a lot of people don't recognize is a huge mental drain that leads to chronic burnout.
The burnout factor is so real. I mean, there have been roles that I have been in where I physically could not get up to go to that job. That the idea of going there was so hard because every aspect of the job was hard. The resources were not available. The conversations were draining because there was no support. That is how you show up. That is what your work looks like when you're that burned out. And that's never the best version of you. That's never the most productive version of you. And we're trying to shift the narrative and not just lean so heavily on the person themselves to advocate for that, but really change the culture around what that looks like. And sometimes it is changing how you ask people to show up to work, whether it's physical or remote. If you're physical, what are you doing in your spaces really to make it a little easier to be in person? You know, what are you doing for the worker who's remote to make it a little bit easier for them to show up and be remote? There's so many small tweaks that you're mentioning that feel like a low bar to start with to really shift the culture and the way people show up. I'm curious if I'm curious if there's anything that we haven't really touched on in terms of your experience within the ERG or within Glassdoor or just being in the job seeking role that we haven't touched on that you feel like would be really important for people to know and understand about the neurodiverse experience.
That's a loaded question.
I
feel
know.
Like there's tons,
you know what?
But how do I pinpoint?
There's always something. There's always something that you're like, this has been bothering me all the time. And I think even in asking you that open-ended question, I did on purpose because I think that there is something that is beneath the surface that's always there that you don't realize will come out in a question like that you get the space to explore.
I think the biggest thing, not only for me as someone who's neurodivergent, but someone who has seen all of these other people struggle with the acceptance in the workplace, is not looking at it as a deficit and not looking at it as a bad thing. And that's kind of the biggest thing we're overcoming right now is there's so much conversation about neurodiversity, and either there's a stigma and people don't want to be labeled as, you know, autistic or ADHD or OCD because it has that negative connotation with it. And the people that fear about checking yes in a job application if they have a disability because it might set them back in the criteria for even getting the job in the first place, and just kind of overcoming that hurdle and understanding how we can set these people up for success to do amazing, great things because they have the capability of doing those amazing, great things if they were supported, if they didn't have to spend 80% of their energy just trying to figure out how to show up in the way that the work wants them to. Being able to do the job to their full ability then propels everybody into this greater space.
I mean, even just using that as the example, how you showed that we can use AI to gamify your meetings. Think about how differently everyone shows up to that meeting. Everyone is so much more engaged. Their creative juices are flowing. They're more interested in the topic. They're more willing to continue this conversation, but they're also willing to continue the conversation with you. That this is how, like, that's a unique talent that you get to showcase, that you get to show up in. And also what makes that creative juice flow makes a whole different line of productivity happen, but it's also the one that shifts the narrative and makes everything progress in a positive direction. And we don't get to do that when we are showing up in a box that is someone else's box. And that is really like the overwhelming message I think that we've been trying to get across. So I am so grateful that you've been here with me, Jordan, that you've been opening up this conversation in a different way. And obviously you agree with me on so many of these things, but I'm glad to hear somebody else's perspective and really shed light on what this looks like in the corporate space. So kind of shifting gears here. What I normally do in every one of my episodes is I have my assistants ask me some rapid fire questions. So I'm going to flip the narrative on you and ask you some rapid fire questions so that people can get to know you. All right. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
I think.
I bet you will. All right. You are burnt out. You need a break. What's your go-to break activity?
Sleep. Nap. Immediate.
I mean, in fairness, you have a newborn, so like any sleep is possible, but
Yeah.
I very much strongly agree with 20-minute nap is always a great activity. All right. Best impulse purchase under $20.
Ooh, recently or lifetime?
Ooh, either.
Oh man, this one gets me in trouble because I am an impulse buyer.
Shocking. We all have ADHD. Isn't that
Ooh.
why do you think those impulse buys are like sitting at the front at the checkout counter? It's just for us. Continue. What do you think your impulse buy is?
Best impulse buy I've ever bought, this stupid little slime Nido cube thing. I play with this every single day. Most recent one, all the red velvet bows. Anything with a bow on it, it's just immediate in the cart.
That's so funny. Also, I love that you picked out like a ADHD friendly toy. See, that's what makes you productive.
Great.
I used to have thousands of them on my desk, and I bought my boss who had ADHD a whole bunch of toys for his desk too. And he's like, this is the greatest day ever. He's like pulling them out. All right. What's a chore that you would avoid at all costs?
Taking the trash out.
Trash. Interesting. Yeah, trash smells.
I don't know why. I refuse it. It's my husband has to do the trash.
No, I fully agree with that one. Trash stinks. I would have said laundry or like the dishes, but let's be real. I don't want to do any of them at any time. So
Yeah, let's.
Thanks so much, Jordan. Is there anything else that you want to kind of leave with us so that we can maybe follow you on your journey as you're trying to find your new roles?
Yeah, actually, I have a YouTube channel. It's called Just Jordan Things, and I talk all about neurodiversity as a mom, neurodiversity in the workplace, and neurodiversity with my mom and broaching that topic. So follow along if you'd like to be a part of that journey.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's funny. It's almost like it's genetic. Like,
oh, weird.
Weird how it shows
Who would have
up.
thought?
Yeah, no, you mean it's not normal to do X, Y, and Z? No, Mom, it's not. Trust me, been there. My mom was probably watching this and laughing like, I do that. That's not weird. Sure isn't. It's just ADHD. So, no, that's great, Jordan. I hope that everyone follows along, and I am certainly going to watch and listen, and I love to hear the dynamics of family when they have ADHD. It's always very funny. All right. Thank you so much for watching and listening. If you're a neurodiverse adult and navigating challenges in your career or a company looking to become more inclusive, then visit us at capableconsulting.com. If you have questions or you'd like to submit for a future episode, then email us at podcast@capableconsulting.com. Follow us on social media at I Am Capable. And don't forget to like and subscribe and leave us a review on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite shows. Thanks for joining us, not just today, but for the whole season. And we'll see you next time for season 2. All right, and one last thing, because I have ADHD and I completely forgot to do this because I didn't have my team here to actually hold me accountable for that one. But I have to say thank you so much to my team. Carissa, Samantha, and Naomi for helping me put this together. Ignite Studio, who has been here recording with us and strategizing all of this. I talk about the fact that when you have ADHD or learning disabilities, that it's always really hard to start, and that if you don't have the support around you, you pretty much never get from point A to point B without the team around you to support you. So I'm extremely grateful to all of them. So thank you. And thank you all to my family and friends who have been on this journey with me, not just from, as a kid to where I am in my career, but really being the voice of reason in terms of how they can support and advocate for me and with me and be that for me. So I am extremely grateful to my friends, my family, and everyone else. And also everyone who has been in my career who's helped make this journey what it is. Every part of the story is valuable and has brought something to make this experience what it is. Good, bad, the ugly, it doesn't matter. It has been part of my journey and part of something that I get to share with you in ways that I have learned from, and I'm very grateful for that experience. So with that, I'm going to say peace out for season 1, and thank you for making this happen. Thank you to all of you and the listeners who are going to really gain something from this experience and support me as I support you. So I will see you for season 2. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for watching and listening to the I Am Capable podcast. My mission is to make sure that with the right strategies, neurodiverse employees and their companies are able to increase productivity, improve communication, and create an environment where everyone feels valued. Through one-on-one coaching, I help neurodiverse professionals gain clarity, build confidence, and develop personalized tools to succeed at work. For companies, Capable Consulting offers custom workshops and trainings designed to help your teams better understand and support a dynamic, neurodiverse workforce. Whether you are navigating career shifts, college transitions, or you are looking for community through the ADHD Lounge, I'm here to help. Let's build a workplace where everyone can thrive. Visit capableconsulting.com to learn more and connect with me today.